All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Erin Palmer at her home in Hillsboro. It's April 18th, 2022. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today, hosting us here today. As you know, we're going to ask you the first question is why wine?
The very first question, which I've given a lot of thought to, is the worst one for me because I got into wine for all the wrong reasons. I worked in software. I worked in a dotcom when everybody did. And I was crushing it. And then 9/11 happened, and I was super proud that I was one of the last groups that was laid off. But that meant there were no jobs available anywhere. And so I struggled to get a job because there was so much unemployment. And I got a job, and it was terrible. And I was like, this is not working. I'll just go out on my own. And I've worked retail since I was 15, which I love retail because I think of it as like sociology. And so I was like, okay, well, what do I know how to sell? And I was like, I could sell anything. What would be fun to sell? And I was like, I don't know. And so I thought about it, and like the coolest people in my mind when I was 28 when I opened the shop, the coolest people in my mind, or 27, were into wine. I looked at people that were into wine and I was like, man, they're cool. Like, I want to be fancy like them. So clearly that's enough to open a wine shop. And so I did. And I've never had a business plan 20 years later. I have regretted it. Every 14 days, I want to leave the key under the mat and walk away. But the rest of the time, I love it. So, and I thought I knew a lot about wine when I opened the shop, and it turns out I did not. And I don't know why people let me stay in business, but they did, and that was really kind of them. And now I know more, but still learning. So I don't know why wine. But I'm lucky. I'm so lucky to be part of the Oregon wine industry. So I'm grateful for that.
Wine because it's cool. That's a good answer. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, except for I think it was the pretentious cool. I don't think it was the new way that people come at wine is so cool. But at the time it was very buttoned up, and I just sort of thought, like, if you hang out with rich people, and if you hang out with people with crazy success, that you'll just accidentally become one of them. And it turns out that's not true. And it also turns out that wasn't actually who I ultimately wanted to be when I grew up, which I'm working on growing up right now.
So let's back up for a second, talk about before wine. You mentioned working at dotcom. Where were you born and grew up, and how did you get into the sort of the dotcom boom when you did?
I'm from Eugene. And so as a good Oregon liberal, that's where I'm from. And I got all the way through college and 2 credits shy of graduating. I was like, I don't need this. It's just a piece of paper. And so I walked away. It was brilliant. Tried to go back a couple times. And it turns out if you take 20 years off, when you go back, it's not 2 credits that you owe them. It's your soul. So I never graduated. And I wound up working at a credit union in my early 20s. And when I was working there, this idea that you could deal with finances online was brand new. Like, you can buy and sell stocks maybe. And that hadn't actually happened yet. And so somebody came to me from a dot-com company and was like, we really like you. And he was all like, we're going to put slides in our building and we're going to have free food. And I was like, that sounds great. And I was taken aside by one of the vice presidents at the credit union, and she said, this probably won't work. People are probably not going to actually trust the internet with their money. So you probably, if you take this job, will lose your job, and then you won't have a job. And I was like, I think it's worth it. Let's do it. And so I went over there, and at the time, I was working at the credit union, and I don't remember exactly what I was making, but it wasn't very much. This was a lot of years ago. And I went in, I got the job. I interviewed with people that were like shooting pool while they were interviewing me and like drinking. And I was like, I could work here. And they called me aside and they said, okay, well, what's it going to take to get you to join our team financially? And I said, $40,000. That was the biggest number I could think of, $40,000. And they said, what? And I was like, 35? I just want to work here. And they said, we pay our admins $50,000. And I said, $50,000. And they were like, we start people at 55. And I was like, $55,000. And so and it was the best because I was so genuinely grateful and excited. And as a self-employed person, I often wish that somebody would say, I'll give you $55,000, because there are years, girl, where you do not make $55,000. But I loved it, and I was so grateful, and I was so excited by the opportunity that I just went at it with full enthusiasm, and no knowledge, was not qualified to be there. I mean, I don't know why dotcoms failed when they hired people with no skill, but it turned out I couldn't offer much except for lots of joy. So I did that. And then, and I had a small child. I had my son when I was 23, which I recommend having that exact child because he's the best human on the planet, but I don't recommend having children at 23. So I had him, and I got laid off, and I was like, what are we going to do now? So
you mentioned earlier that you thought you knew about wine. So tell me what you knew about wine before you started the shop. How did you learn about wine, and what did you think wine was, or what did you enjoy about wine?
So my parents, from Eugene, my dad's a psychologist, and my mom has worked in, she has worked in like art museums, and she's worked with nonprofits, and they enjoyed wine. And as a young person, I remember that, they had a wine club, and they would kick in dollars together, and they'd buy like really expensive bottles. Like some of them were like $20. And so I was around people that really cared about wine. And I was born in 1974, and so, the wine industry in Oregon was born in 1974, roughly, so like I've sort of come up with it. And so my parents would do these wine tastings, and back then they would just put the wine bottles in the sink full of water overnight, and in the morning they'd come back and all the labels would have floated off the bottle because they weren't really glued on, and there was only the front label, no back label. Some old school nonsense. And so I just was around it. And I think that's when I say that I was really attracted to that sort of thing. Like I saw my parents with their friends having this very social thing and food and wine. And I was just really like, that's super cool. And my mom's background had been, she'd gone to school for architecture and didn't pursue that, but she has a great graphics brain and talent. And she actually designed, I tagged you in it once online a long time ago. She designed a wine label for Chateau Bianca, and that label is really old school. And she won't give it to me. I wish I had it. It's at her house, but if I get nothing else out of there, well, I hope I get that empty bottle of wine because it's super cool. So I was just around it, and so I thought I knew by osmosis a lot about wine. I did not. And so I kind of got into it, and I was enjoying it, but I didn't have any money, and so I didn't really get it. But I knew that I could learn, because when I was in high school, I got a job at a local camera company, and I didn't know anything about cameras, and I knew I could learn. And I remembered somebody walking in asking me at the camera store for a loop, which I thought was a roll of film. And anybody who knows anything about photography knows, in fact, it is like a little monocle, a little, and I didn't know that at the time. And I was embarrassed, but I was like, oh, but I'll never forget that, and I'll never get it wrong again. So like, I just think that education is sort of like that. Like you can learn something and then have it. And so I thought, well, I can just keep moving forward on wine and keep learning. Little did I know, it's an enormous, unlearnable thing. I mean, I spend probably 20 hours a week listening to podcasts, reading books, trying to get it. And I've got more of it, but I don't have it because it's too big.
So as the education has continued, what about wine have you found to be the most intriguing thing? What keeps you interested and keeps you engaged?
Yeah. So you may or may not know that actually before I had the shop, because I didn't tell you, before I had the shop, I started teaching wine classes in people's homes. I don't even know if that was legal. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, guys. It was like 20 years ago. So I started doing that, and I wanted to be, this is what I would say to my friends, I wanted to be the Mary Kay of the wine world. And here's what I meant by that. I was so disappointed that young people and so many people didn't feel welcome in the wine industry. They didn't know how to go to a winery and feel comfortable or confident. They didn't feel welcome. They didn't feel like they belonged, and they didn't feel like they knew even what to do. And I thought, it's really simple. If you give people the basics, if you tell them how to hold a wine glass, if you tell them how full to make the wine glass, to tell them the temperature that the wine should be at, if you tell them which direction to swirl, and you probably shouldn't put water in it between tastes, and here's why. People want to be successful and they want to be confident and competent. but they need to learn that. And that information hasn't been out there. And, 20 years ago, it was still very much a rich white guy country club vibe. And so it was hard for people to go and feel like they knew what they could do. And so I taught this class. I've taught more than 2,000 classes now. That's what I love. And I've probably taught, 300, 400 classes of what I used to call how to look like a wine snob in under 2 hours. And I don't call it that anymore because I'm almost 50 and it doesn't sound as cute coming out of a 50-year-old as it did out of a 28-year-old. But I wanted people to have that. I wanted people to feel welcome. And my family, we are of the group that talks about you've got your logical family and your biological family. You build your family, and I'm very much our family is built. We have come together through a lot of different ways, and we have we're transracial family, and we've got a lot of queer folks in our family, and we just wanted to think about. I want everybody from disenfranchised groups to have enough confidence and power that they can go where they want to go. And that's what keeps me involved in it now, and enthusiastic about it now, is that I see the doors opening further and further and further. It used to be I was just trying to kind of block this little tiny door open, like rush in the back door and we'll let you in. And now the front doors are open. And I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm kind of rambling, I apologize, but this is what I love, is watching new people feel welcome and confident. And then watching the new winemakers, my God, they're so brave. Watching them, they're I think we'll do pet nats. 6 years ago, I was like, I've never heard of pet nats. And I love bubbles more than anything, and obviously it's old, not new, but it's new to us, and watching the bravery of the winemakers. I mean, and when they miss the mark, the confidence to pick themselves back up, and I love that. And it even super, super terribly hard vintages like 2020, when we were all trying to just emotionally survive COVID and physically survive COVID. And then the smoke and the fires, and watching them figure out what to do in their darkest moments that would come out with, some joy. And that's been really engaging and really interesting for me. And I've been so proud. I just feel so proud that I get to be tangentially involved in this way.
So when the idea for you came to you to open the wine shop, how did it come to you, and what did you kind of envision that would be? What did you envision a wine shop would be?
I had only been in a couple of wine shops in my life. You guys, this is really poorly thought out. I'm really not sure how we're still here 20 years later. I was teaching wine classes, and I had a liquor license, but I would load up my car. If I was teaching a class with 5 wines, this is hilarious. I'd load up my car with 5 cases of wine, and I would drive to the wine class and I would do it. And then I'd be like, you want to buy some wine? And I would sell them wine out of the trunk of my car. It was totally legal. And then people were like, yeah, I'll take a case. And I'm like, I only have 9 bottles, And so I was like, I got to figure this out. And so then I wound up that my home office was just full of wine bottles and wine boxes. And I was working full time in the basement. And I was like, well, if I'm just going to be trapped in a room all day long, I should be trapped in a room that people can come to and get wine out of. So I was like, I'll just find the cheapest space I can possibly get. And so I found a space on the back of a mall that was so sketchy that it actually was torn down. And I was in a back, I didn't even have my own mailing address. And I was there for 10 years. And I referred to that often as my college apartment. You should have been there just a couple of years and moved along. But I was like, girl, my rent's $1,300 a month. I am not leaving here because my current rent is all the dollars. And so I didn't have a plan, but then I put $30,000 worth of wine in it, and $30,000 is still a big number. And I put all this wine in, and it was like putting primer on a wall. It just soaked into the walls, and I looked like I didn't have any wine at all. And I was like, well, this is a terrible disaster. I had folding tables. I'd gone to used stores and just bought whatever I could buy it was before we had IKEA. Imagine what I could have done if we had IKEA back then. And so I didn't have a vision. I worked 7 days a week, and then I realized that that whole idea of you train people how to treat you. If I'm open 7 days a week, they're going to expect me to be open 7 days a week. I had a kid. I had a little kid. And so the office was his playroom. Dallas is his name. And, we would just go, and he wasn't in school in the beginning, and then he wound up in kindergarten and in school. And it was he and I against the world, and we were having a great time. And he was with me, and we were just crushing it with no money, and we were pretty bad at it in the beginning. And one time I was working in the shop, and I worked really hard, and I really love people, and I really want to be successful. And Dallas had one of those little tiny kid Adirondack chairs. You know what I'm talking about? They're like tiny little chairs. And he was sitting right outside. There were glass doors, so I could see him. He's at the little top of his head, and he was sitting outside the door greeting my clients, and I was like, oh, how cute. And everybody knew Dallas, and everybody still knows Dallas. Now he's like a man. And he comes in one day on a Saturday, and he's got folding paper money, $2 or $3. And I've never given my kids an allowance. And he had folding paper money. And I was like, child, what are you doing? And he had been out there making origami frogs, selling them to my customers. I have never been more embarrassed in my entire life. I was like, child. And it was so cute. So it's not what I envisioned it would look like, but it's what it was. And it was so special and so silly. And it's just like parenting. I suppose if I'd had any idea what it took, I would have never, ever done it, but I didn't know. So I just did it. And, the second or third day that I was open, an executive at Nike came in, and, he came in and he looked at my shoes and was underwhelmed. And he said, let me take you to the Nike employee store and let's get you some shoes. And I was like, oh God. He's like, you can't be so close to Nike world headquarters. And I think they were Champion shoes, honestly. And because I could afford them. And so we go to Nike, and he starts putting shoes in a cart for me and for Dallas. And all I'm thinking is, I don't know which credit card has $50 available on it. I mean, 20 years ago, it was probably $50 for a pair of shoes for me and a pair of shoes for Dallas. And I was just so scared, how I want to be cool. I want this guy to think I'm cool. And I obviously need these shoes or I can't work in Beaverton. And he bought the shoes for my son and I, which I did not expect. And it was really sweet. And I had lots of kindnesses like that from lots of people. And which is why I just always want to scream when people say, I'm self-made. The hell you are. You are definitely not self-made because somebody bought you a pair of shoes or somebody did something for you. And, I probably worked 70 hours a week, so I was putting in the hours, but I was getting a lot of support from a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did people find you? How did you advertise? How did you let people know that you existed and had wine?
Oh, God. So there used to be a thing called newspapers, and I paid for a insert, a 8.5 by 11 colored sheet of paper that was wine shop now open, and that didn't work. And I paid for mailers, and turns out that didn't work. This was all early internet. I mean, early internet. I had a dial-up AOL. This was a long time ago. And which kids at home, you'll have to look up what that means.
But search for it by Lycos or something.
Right.
Netscape
Oh my
Navigator.
God. It was, I think so. Yeah. So I tried all those kind of things, and they didn't work. A gal that I'm still friends with, Shanna Larson, is a private chef, and she and one of her friends stood out on a street corner with a wine shop now open sign for no reason at all, just to be helpful. I joined business networking groups, and I joined Rotary clubs, and if you'd have me, I joined it, and that was crazy. And I read this awfully not pertinent anymore book called Guerrilla Marketing. And it was if you want to get somebody's attention, you mail them something, you put 17 stamps on it, and they'll be like, what is this? And I was like, okay, so I just tried you guys, if I would have finished college, maybe it would have gone a little different. I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing. And I just was keep throwing things at the wall. Just keep trying. And I thought at the time that it was really, they were drawn to my special, unique gifts. I think that they kind of felt bad for me because I worked so hard, and I think they were just give her the money. Just buy the wine from her. This is pitiful. That's quite a come up story, isn't it? And possibly the only people that will listen to this is my husband, my daughter, and my son, and they'll be like, "Yeah, saw the whole thing." So I just kept going, and the internet came along, and newsletters came along. When I first had a newsletter, I mailed them. I hand wrote the envelopes, and I mailed them. That was a long time ago. So.
What about the wines themselves? How did you choose wines? What were you looking for, and how did you kind of pair wines to customers? What were the customers looking for?
So if you're listening on mic, I just was drinking my champagne. Excuse that noise. I talked about wine to people the way that I wanted people to talk about wine to me, and I still do that. I work with a man works at the shop with me, Andy McVeigh, and he was the head winemaker for Dobbs and Wine by Joe, and he's incredibly smart, and he talks about wine accurately. And I hear him sometimes, I see him sometimes when I'm describing a wine to somebody, I'll be like, "Oh my God, it tastes like summer." Like, you know, when you've had a great summer day and you're like, "This is a perfect day. That's what this wine tastes like. You should buy it." And people are like, "I'll take 2." And he's like, "You didn't tell me what it tastes like." I'm like, "I told them what they need to know." Like, I found out from them what they like and what they don't like in a wine. I understand food pairing. I understand palates. I have a great palate memory. I've got 1,100 different unique choices of wine in the shop, and I know what they all taste like. Like, that's where my skill set lies. So I don't need to talk about pH levels with somebody or talk about bricks or talk about those kind of things unless they want to, and I understand it. But most people don't want to talk about that. Most people want to say, I'm obsessed with Ina Garten, and I'm going to make Jeffrey's roasted chicken tonight, and I want wine. And I just say, "You want red, white, pink, or bubbles?" Because I can make something from any of those categories work. Great. Do you have a price range? Great. Do you have a region that you care about? Great. Is there a type of winemaker that you really want to support? A woman winemaker, a BIPOC winemaker, a queer winemaker? Like, what do you want? And then I will find you the wine. And that's how I think that people want to know about wine. And that's how I try to talk to them in a way that is memorable to them, not so over their heads. And then if they're like, "I want to nerd out," I'm like, "Let's do it. Let's get deep in the pocket and let's nerd out together." And then I just try to absorb as much as I can, because when I get the super nerds and I can't keep up, that is an interesting challenge, but it's a little embarrassing.
So when you started, did you have a focus in mind for region or type of wine? Or, I assume that all kind of came, but were you thinking like local wines, international wines?
Oh yeah, no, I had no idea. I had no plan. Oh, but you asked me 400 hours ago how I was trying the wines and learning about wines. When you get a new liquor license, that information goes out to all the distributors. And it's a little bit like piranhas. And they're like, "Oh, somebody might have," because there's a bunch of pile of money, before you open your restaurant or your wine shop or whatever, you have this pile of money and you have to spend it. And it's never easier to get a placement than in the very beginning, because they have to make, like, at that time, I was going to have a choice of like 300 different wines. Now we have 1,100 and I'm like, we don't have enough. But that's the easiest time. And so they're tripping over themselves trying to show you wines. And they'd come over to my home, to my kitchen to show me wines, or I'd go to trade tastings on occasion, and they'd come over and they would say, "Oh, this is a Rioja." And I would say, Rioja, sure. Is that how you say that word? Okay, I got it. What's the grape? "Oh my God, you don't know the grape?" And I'm like, "Hey, I do not know the grape." And they would tell me, and then I'd be like, "Well, why? But this is a Tempranillo, and this is a Tempranillo, and this is a Tempranillo, and they're all from the same region." And they would educate me. The reps would educate me, and they were, and the difference. And I still have reps that I've worked with for 20 years. I was told whatever I do on this interview not to name drop. And I'm like, why would I not? These are the people that saved me. These are the people that were patient with me and were hilarious with me and explain things to me. And why would I not give them credit? Like, that's crazy talk to me. I'm like, if I can't pronounce their name right, then I shouldn't be using their name, because I clearly don't know them. But I had these reps that I still work with. Tamara McAllister, who's been in the business for 30 years. Who you should meet if you haven't. Let me give you a couple names. Tamara McAllister, unbelievable. And she is just the most calm, patient, engaging person. And she was with Willamette Valley Vineyards and Bacchus. Back in the day, Bacchus was a distributor. So I've been with her the whole time. I've been with Heather Lack from Casa Bruno for 16 years. She's been my rep. I've been with Andy Miner, who's got his own label called Hunk Man that actually is made by my friend Michael Lundeen, is actually the winemaker, and it's Andy's label. And I've been with Andy. He and I were the same age when we started in the industry. And we have everywhere that he goes, I go with him if he changes distributors. And over 20 years you do, because I value that he took the time, although we were children together. We didn't know anything together. But I value all these people that took the time. Ron with Divine, he was my rep 20 years ago. All these people that took the time and that were patient with me and weren't better than and weren't looking down their noses at me, you could tell right away. And I gave them all my money. And the people that would show up and just be like, you don't know that? I was like, this world is enormous. I don't know most things. Most things I don't understand, but those people, I'm like, no, thank you. Mm-hmm. And now that our shop, we're on track to do $1 million this year, which is a lot of in 2022 money. That's a lot of dollars. And, during the pandemic, we sold 75,000 additional bottles in 2020 than we had in 2019. We still made a lot less money, which was a bizarre thing because we lost all of our events and all of the high revenue things that we do. But 75,000 additional bottles. Well, so all these, and everybody talks in this industry. You keep your nose clean because everybody knows what you're doing. And the word was out that our checkbook was popping. And people that had not taken care of us, that had been disrespectful or, had disregarded us for years, they were suddenly like, actually, Erin, we'd love to show you some wine. And oh gosh. And I was just like, you talking to me? Like, you wouldn't help me when I needed you. And you wouldn't help me when I was struggling and when I was trying to learn and when I was really doing the work to try to get to where I am now. And now, are you kidding me? So some of my reps are I don't work with some of the larger distributors because I'm like, oh, no, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. No, because they just weren't around.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your customers then. I assume you in the early days you were kind of looking for what you could find. Have you built relationships with people who have come back, and how have you sort of built a customer base? What are they looking for in you, and what are you providing for them?
Yeah, I'm so unbelievably grateful for the clients that we have. We have tons and tons of clients that have been around for 20 years. And I actually have a software program for our point of sale that I can go back and look at when the first time that you came into the shop. I can look at how much you've spent with me over the years, which is alarming. But they've stuck with me, and they send me articles like, hey, you might be interested in this. And they've done unbelievable things for the shop, for myself, for my children. And so what they want from me is what I want from them, which is a sense of community. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to be a regular at a cafe or a restaurant, and somebody you walk in and they're like, Rich, you want the usual? And you're like, oh my God, they've seen me. I am a seen human being in this world where you can be not seen all the time. And that's what I want from them, and that's what I want to give them. I want to know their names. I want to connect with them really personally. I want to ask about their kids and their families and their dogs. My God, if you've got a dog, we would like to talk about that. I want to be part of their lives because what I offer isn't that special. I sell wine. You can get wine at Costco, and you can get wine at the grocery store, and you can get wine online, and you can get wine anywhere you want to get wine. And I know that. So trying to sell a product that you can get anywhere is a fool's errand. Whenever people are like, I'm going to retire and open a wine shop like this, I'm like, are you crazy? Don't do that. So what I'm offering that works for a lot of people and doesn't work for a lot of people. Ooh, the people that don't like me do not like me. But the ones that I connect with, that are my people, are are just part of our community. We do a ton of fundraisers, a ton of nonprofit work, because I want to be part of the community. I want to have those genuine connections with people, and I know I'm not talking about the wine, but that's what we do. We see people and we know people, and we have very little turnover at the shop. The employees stick around for years and years and years, which is great because there are people that don't prefer me or don't prefer my palate, and they love Rob, my hospitality manager. He's been there for 10 years, and there are people that walk in and they'll be like, oh, Rob's not here. Okay, I'll come back. And I'm like, I can help you. I know stuff. And they're like, and I think that makes me actually really proud when they do that, when they come in and they're looking for somebody else that on the team and they're disappointed not to have them. It actually just fills me with such pride because I'm like, connection, because you can buy, without connection, you can buy anywhere. I wish they wouldn't. I want them all to shop with me. But yeah, I didn't know before this very moment that Rich takes notes, copious notes during interviews, and he's going to run out of paper. And I don't know if that's normal. And his handwriting is so small, it's amazing. Y'all, this is impressive.
Yes, you're letting some of the secrets out of the sack here, aren't you there? Yes, copious notes. And tiny handwriting that no one else can read, which is part of the glory, too.
I know, I can't see it at all.
So tell me about growing the wine collection itself. As you started to learn more about wine, as you had distributors who were helping, as you were kind of just discovering your own palate and what you wanted to sell, what did you look for? How do you...
I'm refilling wine right now. Don't worry about it, guys. Just working. Okay.
How did you stock your shelves with all the options you have? I mean, you obviously have an infinite number of options of wine. What did you look for to fill out, as you've grown, to fill out the shelves and fill the collection?
Yeah. In the beginning, because again, I was a misguided wine drinker in the beginning, I was trying to fill the shelves with known famous wines. I thought that was a necessary thing. And so if it was basically because I knew so little about wine, I was like, oh, if I recognize a name, it's clearly famous because I don't really know that much. Mm-hmm. And so I was bringing in wines without understanding who they were, like who the winemakers were, who the owners were, what their commitment to their community, what their values were, because I thought that would compensate for my lack of knowledge, that people would be like, oh, she has this famous winery. And so I was filling my shelves that way originally because I didn't trust my own palate. And then as I started to trust my own palate and I could say like, ooh, this tastes like summer. this tastes like a good party. Ooh, you're going to have a hangover. You're going to want this bottle. That'll be helpful. Like as I started to trust my own palate, I started to expand that. And then I started to trust my clients more too. Mm-hmm. And I in the beginning, I thought that what they wanted from me was recognizable, famous, whatever. And then I realized that they wanted to be in partnership with me. They wanted us to be on a journey together. And so if I could say, oh, I was at this winery and I met their winery dog and I did this thing and hey, have you ever heard of gravity flow? Or hey, have you ever heard of, cement eggs? Woo, that was a new thing, right? Like all of this stuff, I realized we were on a journey together and I started to think, okay, if the nucleus right here, like that they're comfortable with, what's just right outside of that? And how can I just expand the circle a little bit? And it took me, so I'm 20 years of the shop in, I'm 21 years of the business in, and it took me till probably about 5 years ago to be like, I can put weird things in their hands and they'll trust me. If I'm good at my job and I say, oh, Rich, you actually really don't care for high tannic wines. Okay, well then I'm not going to stick a super high tannic wine in your hand. That's not going to be helpful. We're not going to have success here. Mm-hmm. But like figuring out what you want and figuring out like, oh my gosh, you know what actually would be amazing for you? I know you think you don't want this, but let's give it a go. And that has been really fun. And then before the pandemic, we had Friday night in-store tastings for 18 years. And that was the biggest thing because it allowed wineries or distributors or importers basically to interview their wine with my clients. They could pour these wines and clients would come in and try them. And if it's a wine that I didn't care for, I'm late to the Sauvignon Blanc party. I didn't care for Sauvignon Blanc for a lot of years. And I mean, there's not a single bottle of it in my house. And there's a lot of bottles in my house. That's just not what I'm drawn to. But if we poured a Sauvignon Blanc and my clients were like, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And I'm like, well, then I need to find a place for this, And I could also introduce clients to things that they were maybe more afraid of, Turley, a famous Zinfandel producer out of California, they make a white Zin that's like, I think it's around $30 and $22. So it's not nothing. People are afraid of white Zin, but if they can try it, then they're like, oh, actually, I like this. You know, white Pinot Noir is a newer thing for Oregon. That's only been around really regularly for about 5 years. The first one I ever had was $60. $60. And now they're coming in a little bit more affordable prices and a little bit more variety. So as we interview the wines together, I get a feel for the clients, and then they get more adventurous, and I get more adventurous, and I find more space for it. And then in COVID times, the shop used to seat 60 in before times, and we had all these tables, and people would come in, and sometimes they were just so mad at COVID, just not at me, just at the world, you know. And they'd say, like, that's an empty table. Why can't I just sit there? Why can't I? And I was like, well, I don't feel safe. You know, before I'd had vaccines, I had to think about myself and my spouse and my children who did not live here, but my daughter has a medical condition, and before she got the vaccine, we were afraid that she would die. It affects her lungs. And I was like, because your need to have a glass of wine is not more important than my daughter's need to live. Like, And so people were so frustrated by this that I was like, we have to take these tables away. And so we took the tables away. We added more. We had to fill it up with wine, because I was like, if it's just filled up with wine, nobody will notice. We'll just use jazz hands to distract them. And that's what we did. And so we added another 150 placements during COVID just to fill it up. And so as we did that, we got more variety, more excitement of stuff. And that was, you know, COVID came, you know, as COVID was happening, then we also had some long overdue, you know, social justice reckoning in this country. And with, you know, the murder of George Floyd and the way that people were responding to Black Lives Matter and responding to different things, it became clear that the shop, in its little tiny platform that we've had, could do a little bit more. We could just do a little bit more. And we've always worked with winemakers that maybe have not gotten as much attention as the more traditional winemakers. But we were like, hey, we've always had these, you know, we've always worked with this particular winemaker, that particular winemaker, and we've almost been sneaky about it in the past. We were just like, oh yeah. And there was an opportunity for the shift of who the winemakers were to really, really matter. And to the consumers. It always mattered to me, and it always mattered to lots and lots of consumers. But there was a new swath of consumers that hadn't yet thought about the concept that every dollar that you spend is a vote. And for those folks that, you know, are good, amazing, special people that maybe hadn't ever thought, like, if I'm spending $50 on a bottle of wine, or 20 or 10, ultimately that goes to somebody. And who do I want that to go to? And so that really changed the set of wine that we had as well. And that's always been a real challenge. It's a little off topic. That's always been a real challenge, because there's wineries locally and nationally and internationally that we will not work with because of the choices that they have made. And that's always been true. And people will call us up still on occasion and say, like, you know, hey, I'm looking for this wine. Oh, we choose not to work with them. And we never say why, but we do say we choose not to work with them, which is not just, we don't currently have that in stock. Mm-hmm. And I you know, and that's been really cool to see people really think about that and really wonder, like, I wonder why they don't work with them. And people are then, I think, in the wine industry starting to think about that a little bit more. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
For you personally, as you were growing the inventory, how did you go about finding those kind of, especially before the last couple of years, finding those kind of underground winemakers, the lesser known, from lesser known and from underrepresented communities? How did you find them? How are you finding them, and how did you kind of bring them into your fold?
I've always had a policy in my shop that we do not talk about or allow people to talk about politics in the shop. This has always been really important to me, because I think that having a place that's a sense of community, you want to feel safe walking in. And what I mean by that is a bunch of things. but it means that no matter who you are, you want to be able to walk through the door and feel like you can exhale. And so I've kept myself, I've kept my employees, I've kept my clients from talking about stuff. And sometimes they'll be like, what? Like, I know you agree with me. And I'm like, yeah, and let's go out, come over to my house, we'll talk about it, but this isn't the time or place for it. So while it wasn't something that we've talked about a lot, I think you'd have to be, I think it's hard for people to meet me and not know who I am and not know what my values are. And I think it's hard for people to meet my staff and not know who I am and not know what my values are. And so I think that people come to me, and to lots and lots of restaurateurs and wine shop owners. I don't think I'm particularly special, but I think if what you're putting out there in this world is like, I want to be a place that builds up and doesn't tear down, then those kind of people come to you. And it's tough because it's not always a match, right? That's the most tricky thing, is that somebody will come to me and be like, this is from this underrepresented winemaker or community that has struggled or and I'm like, oh my gosh, the story's amazing, I can't wait, I want to try it. And then I try it and I'm like, oh god, this wine is terrible. Obviously you don't say it just like that. Then I say,
this wine has a lot of character.
At the moment, this isn't going to be a great match for us. This is shoot, because it's not always going to be a match. And that's actually the most challenging moment, is when you're like, oof, I wish I could. But for here in this environment, I can't work with this. But overall, that's how I get most of them. And then, of course, with the rise of social media, if you like a Black-owned winery, then your feed will start suggesting other Black-owned wineries. If you like, this kind of business or that kind of business, or from this region or that region, you start to get more. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with the power of hashtags, you can look up something that matters to you. Women in wine, queer-owned wine. You can start to look up things that are whatever that is. I mean, you can get real focused in the wine industry now. I helped somebody with a wedding, and they wanted kosher wine from a gay-owned winery, and I was like, this is going to be a really hilarious email to write as I'm trying to figure out how to get this information. And I found it, and it was in Australia. It's but when you start to put things out, you kind of attract back what matches you.
So tell me about building a staff then. You mentioned you had a staff that a lot of people have stuck around, you have a low turnover rate. Mm-hmm. As you started to build staff, as you started to hire people, what were you looking for, and how did you kind of bring them into what you wanted the place to be, what you wanted Portland Wine Cellar to be?
Yeah, this is maybe one of the more challenging things for me, because I didn't have a really good sense of self until I was about 35. And so, and I'm still really working on it every day. I'm like, you can be better, you can change this. But I didn't always make really good choices. I get really caught up in charisma. I love a big energy. And sometimes that blinds me from seeing somebody's character in a way that I wish that, with retrospect, with hindsight, that I'm like, oh, should have seen that coming. So I didn't always make the choices that I wish that I had made. But I had an office manager, Lori Elkier, for 13 years. And she left me when her kids were grown and gone, and that had been the plan the whole time. And I'm really proud of that. Rob's been our hospitality manager for 10 years. And, I'm hoping that he and I decide to retire on the same day, and we drop our mics and we walk out, high five, good game. And I'm hoping that's not for a minute, because I just love him to pieces. So we rarely have I had to ever run an ad for employees. I mean, occasionally I have. That's actually how I met Rob. And I think back then, a million years ago, it was Craigslist, in case you're wondering. It was before winejobs.com was a thing. And so, I meet people, and against all the good judgment, my husband's the HR director of his 1,500 person company. And he's like, I'm sorry, you didn't do a background check? No, I had this feeling. And he's like, oh girl, but I've gotten much better at trusting my gut and recognizing who's going to be a good match. And I've become a better manager. And I think that's one of the biggest things is most people in this world are amazing and want to be amazing. But when you're a lousy manager, which I was for most of my career, you don't nip things in the bud, and then they grow, and then everybody's mad, and it's a really regrettable thing. And I've been really, really, really working on that for probably about the last 10 years. Like, it's not good enough to just be buddies. You also have to have this relationship that has some structure and has some accountability. And unfortunately, sometimes when you add structure and accountability, you change your relationship in a way that an employee is not necessarily interested in pursuing. If it's not just drinking champagne and goofing, but like, we got to do some work. And so, that's tough, but I am so proud of the amount of relationships that have been built and that still exist. We've always had up until COVID times a kitchen job, a couple of kitchen jobs. And so those are very short-term positions. We expect people to take that job and have that job for a year or 2 or 3 while they're in college, that kind of thing. And so we know we're not going to have a permanent relationship with them. And I still have, if you look at like my Instagram feed, my little tiny private one, it's just past employee after past employee. And that is, to me, like, it's just like a little hug when I see them, because of course not all past employees are connected with me by their choice or mine or ours or whatever. And sometimes I really spin in my head like, shoot, how did that go poorly? How could that have gone better? Like, you spend a lot of time thinking about the one thing that's a real disappointment versus the 10 real successes. And so I'm really honored by the commitment and relationship I still have with so many people that I've had the chance to work with over the years.
You mentioned obviously events being a big part, again, in the before times. Events and education being a big part of what you're doing. So let's talk about events first.
Yeah.
As you started to build events, what were you looking for in events? What did you find worked, and what have you what are the sort of the biggest highlights for events for you?
In before times.
In before times,
yeah.
Yes, before times.
So the first shop was like 1,500 square feet. Rich just laughed at my tiny little shop. It was adorable. And most of it was unusable. It was so hilarious. I sponge painted the walls. I don't know if you know what that is. It's terrible. So that was my first shop. And so the events there had to be very small because the shop was very small. When I moved because we were forced out, the building was under redevelopment, and some shady stuff went down, and some lawyers I'm going to answer your question with this great story. Some lawyers for the company that was redeveloping it went around and told all the business owners in the mall not to pay their rent, that they didn't need your rent. They weren't here for your rent. Don't worry about it. And I went around banging the drum as loud as I could, like, you have to pay your rent or they're going to evict you. And they're like, no, they said we didn't have to. And I was like, you don't have that in writing. And then they went around after like 4 months of this and did a pay or quit, and kicked out everybody but myself and the one restaurant I could convince to pay their rent. And they wound up getting moved with a huge pile of money into a brand new restaurant that was amazing. It was like so great. And I wound up getting enough money to relocate my business as well. I did not make money. It's taxable, but they would have been happy to put us out of business. They put a lot of people out of business. I mean, it was tragic. But the two of us were like, yeah. And I'm like, come on, we did this. So when I moved, I was like, okay, I need to have a meeting. I need to have a classroom because the classes were the really important thing for me. And so I found the 2,500 square foot, basically square that I'm in now. And it had been a Taekwondo studio. So it had no walls. It had outside walls. Otherwise you're just outside. But it just was this open space. And it had mirrors all the way down one wall, as you would. And so I was like, we should put some rooms in here. Let's put a bigger room and a smaller room. We'll connect them with double doors. We'll do that. And I just literally was like, this seems like a wide enough room. And put a piece of tape on the floor. And I was like, put a wall here. This is basically how my entire life has gone. I didn't think about it. I didn't measure it. I didn't shop it around. I don't know, guys. I don't know why. But that's what I did. And I was pretty good. Like, you need a lot of outlets. Like, that's what I know is there's never enough outlets. Put some outlets in. And so we built these 2 rooms, one to be a classroom and one to be a room. I don't know. We just need another room. And as we had that room, then, we're right by Nike and Intel. They started to say, like, could we rent that for an offsite meeting? And I was like, if you're going to give me cash money, yeah, of course you can. Great. And we had a partner chef at the time, somebody who was working at the shop as a chef. But she was an architect by training, and I don't know if you know this, you make a lot more money as an architect than you do as a chef in a wine shop. So she did that for a bunch of years, and she left, but we still had events on the calendar. And so I was like, well, we had a 40th birthday party coming up, and this, and I said to the staff, like, we can't cancel this person's 40th birthday party. This is so important to them. I'll cook. My mom's a chef. I was like, so if my mom's a chef, I'm practically a chef. If your partner's a surgeon, you're practically a surgeon. I think it's all the same. So I was like, we'll cook, we'll do it. And anything she complains about, we'll comp. If she's like, this chicken was weird, yeah, no charge on the chicken. Like, if we have to comp the entire party, we will comp the entire party. We're not ruining her birthday. We're not doing it. And of course, she was like, this was amazing. And I was like, all right. So I just started cooking while I was looking for a chef. And this was like 9 years ago. And I was like, I'll just do this for a minute. It'll be fine until we find somebody who can do it. But the kind of events that we have, sometimes I have to be there at 4 a.m. to make pastries. And sometimes I have to be there till 10 o'clock at night because they've had a dinner or whatever. Nobody wants that job. Nobody wants that job. And so I just kept doing it. And people would be like, oh, you're a really good cook. I'm a really good cook the way that, like, home style. Like, I'll make you a cake and it'll taste amazing, but it's gonna be a little wonky, you know? Like, I mean, my cookies are gonna be amazing. They're not gonna be all the same size, but you're gonna love the flavor. Like, are you good with that? So people just started like doing events, and I was like, listen, also, you don't get to decide what you're eating. So I'm not even kidding. We've done this forever. And we've just started to welcome groups back in, and they're hilarious because the people that have worked with me from before know. All I need to know is how many people and what actual dietary restrictions do you have? For realsies. Not like, I don't like food that's like the shape of a square. Like, I'm not interested in that.
No white food.
I'm not doing that. But like, if you have real dietary stuff, fine. And then they just show up. And I'm like, this is what you're eating today. And they're like, yay! And it's hilarious because it takes a whole lot of work off the plate of the admins or whoever's in charge of the event, but it also adds, again, that sense of community because it's kind of like coming to my house. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you come over for dinner. Look what I made. And people are like, cool. And again, when I said that I'm not for everybody, that's not for everybody. So some people are not so into it. But we just started doing events like that. So we had the space, and then we would allow one night a week, something at no charge, so like a PTA or a fundraiser, that kind of thing, because I want to give back a little bit, but you also, part of sustainability, and sustainability is important to me, part of sustainability is it has to be, business-wise, it has to be sustainable. If you give away everything you own and you still have your $1 zillion rent due, well, it's not going to be sustainable. So we started just doing events like that, and it just grows. And I'm slightly too proud to beg, but I'm not too proud to ask. So I'll be like, hey, Rich, I'm really glad you had a good event. I actually need more events. If you know anybody, could you tell them? And then, like Nike's got an admin email group, and they'll send out an email. I've gotten on some lists like the Wine Cellar is hosting events, offsite business all days. You don't get to choose your food, but you're going to love it there. It's got a heat and air conditioning. You're going to love this place. And so we just started to grow. And in before times, we were doing about $30,000 a month in events. And when COVID came and we thought COVID was going to be 3 to 6 weeks, remember how cute that was? Mm-hmm. I was like, what will I do without that $30,000? What will I do? I don't know, but they'll never come back in the same way. And so, but our events have just always changed based on what people needed. I basically would say yes to almost anything. And my rates have gone up over the years appropriately. My husband now is like, not my husband now to imply that I've had a bunch of husbands. Sorry, babe. Big fan of yours. One of the things that my husband now says to me is, in the beginning, we were so poor. When we met, we had $97,000 in consumer debt. We needed $100 so badly that if I had to work an all-day event, and by the time that I paid all of the expenses and paid all of the staff, if I had worked 10 or 12 hours and came home with $100, we needed that money. Mm-hmm. And he's like, now you're like, do I need it in the same way? Raise your rates or say no to the work or say yes. But like it's changed what we are doing and how we're doing it. My kids are grown and, mm-hmm. It's just a different game. Yeah.
You mentioned the education being a big part of things for you from the very beginning, teaching wine. So tell me how that has grown and evolved as your sort of knowledge of wine has grown and evolved, and what kind of classes you offer and why. I guess why you choose the classes you do.
Yeah. That's this is the most exciting part of my job for me, is the teaching. It's a blast. It is a blast because it's such a big world, and it's so interesting. Like, a lot of people have jobs that pay a whole lot better and are a lot more consistent than mine. But a lot of people have jobs that are, you know what you're going to do. You get to work in the morning, you know what you're going to do. You do that job, and the next day you're going to do a similar job. And that works for a lot of people's brains, and I love that for them. And that doesn't work for my brain. So in the beginning, I was like, well, I can do this wine snob class, and we'll talk about etiquette. Okay, they like that. And then they're like, I want to do another class with you. Like, oh, okay, well, and it all had to be with whatever I could teach with confidence and competence. And so I'd be like, okay, I actually understand the Oregon wine industry now pretty well. I could teach about Oregon wine. Okay, I could do that. Okay, well, I could teach side-by-sides, meaning I could teach like Pinot Noir from Oregon and, compare to California, compared to Burgundy, compared to like those kind of things. Like, okay. And so as my knowledge base grew, I would start to say, I could offer you this. And that was great. Now people will come to me. I just did a couple weeks ago a birthday party, and they're going to be traveling to Italy next year. And so they wanted to do an Italian wine class. And I'm like, and I love Italian wine, and I know a lot about Italian wine. I wouldn't want to teach an Italian wine class to an Italian winemaker, but I do, I know enough and for what I'm doing. And I was like, yeah, this will be great. And so as people want different things, I love to research, and like I said, I love podcasts, and I learn really well that way. And so I was like, okay, we can do this. And one of the things that I think is really cool about it, and again, now that I have a better sense of myself, is like my Italian wine class, I was like, okay, guys, Italian wine, let's start with slavery. Because now I have a platform where I can talk about things that we don't talk about in the wine industry. And obviously you don't talk about slavery, jokey, because this is not something we're joking about. I think it's important that people understand the history of wine. And so we'll spend the first minute or two talking about, which is not enough time, obviously, but talking about this is how this wine industry in this region came to be. It was built on the back of enslaved people. And I don't want to ruin your party and bring you down. I do want, as you're 2 days later, because then I'll distract you with jokes, and I'll distract you with knowledge, and you'll have a lot of fun. But I want 2 or 3 days later, or whenever, I want you to go I'm interested in that. I want to find out more about that. I want to understand, what do you mean? I don't think that people think about wine and think about it being built on the backs of enslaved people. Here in Oregon, we know that there's migrant workers doing so much of the work, but we still don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the toil and who has to do it. And so that's part of what I think is really interesting, is that I can slide in some serious things in a not disparaging, jokey way, but in a way that you can't ruin somebody's 40th birthday. They're not okay with that. But I do think that there is no wrong time to learn. And I think there's no wrong time to be reminded that when you're in a wine class, that you're in such, talk about the height of privilege. You're at a wine event, you're drinking wine, you're like, woo! And with that, there comes some history. So I love to I start with the history, and then I always build on the history, and then talk about where the grapes have come from, and then how the winemaking style started, and it just grows from there. And I rarely have a plan when I start a class. I've researched it, I'm ready, my brain is full, and then I just start down whatever pathway they're interested in. And if their eyes start to gloss over, then we back it up. If they start to look annoyed, then I look around, I go, well, only that one person's annoyed, and honestly, I think they weren't going to like me no matter what I said. So I don't worry about them, but I kind of modify from there, and I love it, and it's a blast.
Are there topics you've added specifically because of your interest or because of customer interest, or have you has it just been kind of an organic I teach this because I know this.
Yeah, all of those things. When COVID arrived, one of the things I do is I teach for Portland Community College, and I've taught with them for almost 20 years. Now it's been 20 years. When COVID arrived, it killed all of those classes, for the term. Just this one term.
It'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine by the summer.
I'm not laughing, I'm crying. And then when we were like, oh no, we can't go back in person for at least another 3 months, they were like, well, why don't you consider teaching your classes online? And I am not the most technologically savvy person that you'll ever meet. I mean, my daughter, Olivia, she's 21 and she is so tech savvy, and she spends a lot of time like telling me my phone is upside down and, like telling me that I've got caps locks on. And I mean, so like I'm not great at it, but I trust my ability to learn. And I was like, I need to make money wherever I can during this difficult COVID time that will be short-lived. So I started teaching online. And in that case, I could have notes in front of me. If I'm teaching a live in-person class, I don't do that with a written, with note cards. I don't do anything like that. But I was like, oh, online. And I would take those giant, Post-it notes or my whiteboards, and I could write notes, and I could just flick my eye up and look and be like, oh, now we're talking about the Romans. Now we're talking about this. And and it was great. So I could actually teach on things that I had a little less memorized or truly understood competency of, because I could refer to some notes. So that was cool. And then probably the most impactful thing that happened to me, and therefore my classes and the way that I teach online, is a good friend of mine, Angie Nomi. She's the current, she's with Adelsheim. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know Angie, I beg of you to know her. She's hilarious. She is probably one of the most, she's probably changed my career more than anybody in the last 5 years. And there's two things that she did. One is that she said offhand, this was not a moment where she was dropping facts on me, but she just said, you'll never go wrong being generous. And, you should know that. You should be born knowing that. But it's a good reminder that give to your community, give, and it will come back. Maybe not immediately, but it will come back. So that's one of them. And she practices what she preaches. So she was like, I think David Adelsheim would really like you. And I was like, oh, Papa, oh my God, no, I'm sweaty. And she was like, yeah, let's do stuff together. So the very first, not immediately, but the very first online class I taught with Portland Community College, David co-taught it with me. Are you kidding me? Everything that changes everything in my world, because I have felt so not welcome in this industry for so long, and I felt like I was clawing my way for my place. And then somebody like Angie, who's just generous with her knowledge and her contacts and her joy, is like, oh, I can connect you to David, who's also about one of the most generous human beings I have ever met in my life. I just adore this human. And, that gave me a lot of confidence, because first of all, to be able to talk, David talks to everybody as a peer. Mm-hmm. David could talk down to people. He could be he's a subject matter expert almost all the time, and he doesn't. He talks to you like a peer, like a long lost friend, just like this is all cool and casual. And that allowed me to just bolstered my confidence and my sense of belonging in this industry. And then Rich, you know what he did? I'm going to tell you. He was like, he's doing these 50 years of the Oregon wine industry, the Founders Series, Founder Stories. He's interviewing the 10 original founding families of the Willamette Valley wine industry. And he was like, you know what, Erin, would be great. He's like, why don't we do monthly Zoom happy hours, because it was all during COVID, and the founders are not getting any younger, neither are the rest of us. And he's like, we can't during COVID get together. That's not safe. He's like, but why don't you, Erin, and myself, David, once a month interview one of the founders, and you can have your guests come. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know whatever industry you're in where you just love this industry and there's somebody that you really respect and you really just want to learn from. But David just handed it to me on a platter and was like, if you'd like this. And I was like, if I'd like this, like, yes, please, and it just like that changed everything, because I've always been so proud of this industry, to be proud of the Oregon wine industry. I mean, I was, the Oregon wine industry started and I was born a couple years later. And so I really wasn't aware of it until I was probably about 20. But I've kind of been a part of it. And I think I say to people all the time, I just want to shake them by their lapels and say, like, you don't understand. You don't understand that we are going to look back at these opportunities and that we've taken them for granted, that we haven't spent the time learning from these people, and the kindness of the founders and of so many more people that are, but we're living it right now. Like, you get to meet them. You don't miss this, guys. Like, I'm so like unbelievably grateful that I get to be a part of it. And so that changes how I think about the shop, and it changes how I think about teaching, and how it changes how I want to interact with my clients. I've always had more Oregon and Washington wines. That's always been the primary focus. But through the Founders Series, it's actually really separated sort of the kind of Oregon wines that I want to work with. And one style is I want to work with so many of the wines from the founders. Mm-hmm. Some of them have sold to companies that I don't have the same connection to them. And I understand that, because if somebody showed up with a big old checkbook right now and one of the keys to my shop, I'd be like, absolutely, have a great day. Like, I get that. I get that completely. But the privately owned ones still, I'm just like, let's keep that legacy going, and let's buy this bottle and respect it. And then the other side is, now I'm like kind of what I think of as sort of the second generation of winemakers that are like wild and they're like trying new things. The ones that are doing that, recognizing that they get to do that because of the OG winemaking crew. If the youngsters that recognize they get there, they get to try these things because of the incredible, hard, just brutal work that the original crew did for us. Those are the two people that I really want to work with, the two types of people I really want to work with. And I'm less interested in sort of the middle ground of people that maybe just came from a lot of money, or they were given this opportunity and they're, I wish them well. I'm not out here like hoping they break their toes or anything, but they don't need my help. The people that need my help is the founders. Not that they need my little voice and my little shop, except for I think they have earned that respect, and I want to give that to them. And then the people that actually do need my help, the newer wine producers that do some crazy things and do some, bold things, and like I want to be a part of that. So that experience has changed completely how I do it. And my daughter, Olivia, who I mentioned, she's 21. And on her 21st birthday last year, Argyle had us out and they let her disgorge a bottle of wine. Like, are you kidding me? And then we went to Adelsheim and David was there because he lives close by to the vineyard. And David was like, oh, let me come over and wish Olivia a happy birthday. And I was like, don't cry. Like, and I see David a lot now, and I'm so comfortable with him. And I like, that's not what was going on. But what was going on with me is I was like, Olivia's 21. There'll be a time when she's 40 or 50 or 70, and she'll have a picture of her with David. And she knew it was special because she knew I was excited for her and because she's just a lovely human being. But she doesn't get it in the way that she will when she realizes, like, I got to meet, she's met lots of people in the wine industry, obviously, but like, are you kidding me? So that's kind of where my love lies right now.
It ties in nice is the next question I want to ask, which is about the industry. So I'm curious about your sort of first impressions of Oregon wine back when you were learning it and getting familiar with it. What did you think of the industry and the people in it, and what are the biggest changes you've seen?
The changes are good. The changes are really, really good. They're really good and they're really necessary and they're still happening. Mm-hmm. So when I got in the industry, I struggled, right? Part of that, everybody wants one reason why you struggle, right? And you really want that reason to not be you, right? Like, everybody's the hero of their own story. Everybody wants to be like, I don't know, I was perfect. Obviously, as I've told you clearly, I was underprepared to be in the industry. I was undereducated on wine. I didn't get it. So that was one problem. But also, I didn't feel welcomed. I didn't feel the distributors and the reps that were trying to sell to me was where I got the most support within the industry, not my clients. And then, who are awesome. And then it was, what else have we got? And I felt not welcome in a lot of ways. I would go to trade events often and be the only woman in the room. That happened a lot. And now I go to trade events and it's, it's not half and half, but it doesn't strike me as so strange because we all live in whatever our little experience bubble is. It took me a lot of years in the industry of feeling sort of bad for myself that I was the only woman or one of only a few women at times. But it took me far too embarrassingly long to say, oh my God, I'm over here feeling badly about being one of the only women in the room. There are no people of color in this room. Like, oh man, you're so myopic of like, how is this going to affect me? And then you're looking around, you're like, this is a mess. And so I've started to see those changes and they have like a good snowball. There's improvements about how big the table is, who's welcome at the table. And some people have had their chairs removed and I'm real happy about that. Some people do not belong at the table and I've seen that change. I have a handful of regrets and some of them are serious and some of them are less serious. A regret that I have is that I didn't keep the very first invitation I got to a women in wine event. This was not about the women in wine in Oregon. This was before this existed. I got an invitation for women in wine to go to a luncheon. And Rich is already cringing. So this is best. This is the best. It was being hosted by one of the large distributors. And it was being hosted by a man, a vice president, of course, who was a dude. And if only I had this to show you because it was brilliant. This man was hosting and the graphic for joining women in the wine industry, this graphic was a woman standing on a rock, like at an ocean, right? So the ocean is behind her and she's standing on a rock with her hands up in the victory pose. Y'all, she was wearing a bikini. I just don't think I can swear on this podcast, but I was swearing a lot in that moment. Like are you kidding me? Do you think this is what I or any other woman wants when we feel that we're not welcomed? Is like, are you fucking kidding me? And so and what's unfortunate about that is I was so mad. I always say to my kids, like, anger is not an emotion. What are you really feeling? I felt sad and I felt discouraged and I felt like there was never going to be a place at the table because I felt like that wasn't somebody saying, oh, shoot, we recognize we haven't done this well. We'd like to do better. I'm in a position of power. I can help. It wasn't that. It felt like it was this guy saying, you'll never be one of us. Here's how you can be successful in this industry. You can be sexy and you can be playful and you can be silly and we'll make room for that. And I was like, well, that's not who I care to be. If that's who you are, you get it, right? Good feminism is you get it. You get whatever works for you. That didn't work for me and it didn't work for most women that I know. And I was just like, so I guess I just won't go. And so I took myself out of a lot of industry things because it was less painful to just avoid them. Mm-hmm. And, people kept telling me when I was in my 20s and 30s, like, women kept saying, oh my God, you can't wait till you're 40. It's going to be amazing. And I was like, oh no, this is a little stressful. I don't love it. And they're like, because you stop caring about people. And like, I can't tell my daughter that in the same way. Like, it has to be a kind of a lived experience. But what I wish I would have known is that I I could have just brought my own chair to the table. I didn't know that. I so believed I wasn't welcome and that I wasn't worthy, because people will do things all the time to people in any industry that the gatekeeping concept, and how do you make somebody feel othered, and how do you make somebody feel unwelcome? Oh, well, where did you go to school? Well, as I've told you, I didn't graduate from college. And oh, well, are you a master som? I'm not. Oh, well, are you, and all these things that I wasn't. And so the message there was, then you are not welcome and you are not worthy. Mm-hmm. And what I should have done is I should have realized that bullies have no backbone. And I should have said to those people, your perception of me is not actually that important, because I'm not doing this, pointing at Rich, excuse me. I'm pointing at the guy that sent me the postcard of the woman in the bikini, pointing at him like, I don't need you to like me, and I don't need you to approve of me, and I don't need you don't support my business. What do I care what you think of me? You don't spend money here. Why don't I look at the people that do support my business? Why don't I look at the people that do believe in me? Why don't I look at my children? And what's the legacy I want for my children? Like, how do I want them to come up? How do I want my son to come up as a young man? And of course, I really felt like that was my greatest opportunity when, as a parent, like, I got a son. I was like, oh, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to make the world better, And then my daughter came to me when she was 5. I became her mother when she was 5. And I was like, oh, I got to get this right too. Like, oh my gosh. And, I'd say to my children all the time, Olivia was really shy when I met her. And I'd say, we used to make her stand up at the dining room table, just the 4 of us, and say, stand tall in this world and make your voice heard. And because she was so shy, she hated that. And she would do it. And now she's like so confident and competent. It's amazing. She's just an amazing thing. But I didn't know that I too could stand tall in the world and make my presence known. I didn't know that. And I didn't feel worthy of that. And I, once I figured that out, once I turned 40 and was like, not interested in you. Like, I've had this shop for 20 years. How many dozens of wine shops have opened and closed in my little community, in the Portland metro community in those 20 years? I mean, it's unbelievable. I get to be proud of what I've built, even if it's not everything I've wanted it to be, but I get to be proud of that. And so as the industry is changing, I'm seeing more of that. I'm seeing more people hired in at positions that are important, women that are hired in at, that are getting more executive jobs at local distributors, and Eugenia Keegan getting the executive of the year for the universe, the whole world. Eugenia Keegan, and she's been in the industry forever. Mm-hmm. And part of me is like, when she got that award, I was of two minds. That just happened. I think it was during 2021, maybe it was 2022. It just happened. Mm-hmm. But time is irrelevant during COVID time, so I don't know when it happened. When she got it, I had two emotions at the exact same moment. One is I was like, it is about damn time. And the other was, how dare you not give this to her 20 years ago? And, I understand that, but we're here today. What do we do today? How do we make it better today? And her getting that award was right. And it was earned. And so that's great. And, we've got other folks advancing in the industry in different ways. We've got programs like Avoy, that are helping vineyard stewards get education so that they can become different. So they can. So generally, it's Latinx folks, for anybody who's maybe not familiar with this program, that maybe come from the vineyard side of things, often with ties to migrant work, not always, and it allows them to get education to go into other parts of the wine industry, so that we're not pigeonholing folks that look a certain way or come from a certain background. This is the only thing they can do. Mm-hmm. So that is newer, and that's impressive, and where it should have happened a long time ago, but it's happening now. Okay. And, we're seeing all this growth in these different ways, and we're seeing consumers walk in that haven't looked like they were, that they feel like their look, whether that's their aesthetic, like they happen to like a certain style of fashion, or they happen to, look a certain way from heritage, whatever that is, they're now saying like, hey, we have money. We have power. And we can vote with our dollars, and we can vote up these wineries that we care about, these people that matter to us. And so they're forcing the change. And, And all we get to do as the wine shop folks, all we get to do and restaurateurs is honor that growth, help them to see like, here's some choices you have, and help them and not stifle that growth by refusing to make wineries available that matter to them.
So you've talked about changes you've seen, obviously accelerated in the last few years. So let's talk about 2020. We talked about it already a little bit. Obviously, the many aspects of 2020, from COVID, social justice, the fires. 2020 was quite a year for all of us here.
Wasn't it?
So with that year kind of in mind, tell me about the adjustments you had to make sort of personally and professionally with all of the various things that came through that year to make sure that you got through it and your shop got through it and your staff got through it. And how did you see the industry around you also kind of adjusting during that year?
It feels like it was a decade ago. I mean, so it's a really hard thing to even like remember. And I don't know if, if somebody were to have that conversation 10 years or 20 years from now, if they'd be like, what do you mean you don't remember 2 years ago? Like, I don't even know. When it happened, when it arrived on our doorstep, and we thought, oh, this could be like, 3 to 6 weeks. What are we gonna do? I made two hilarious in retrospect choices. One was, I said to my employees, I want you to hear this because this is hilarious. I'm gonna buy lunch for us every single day during COVID as like kind of a hazard pay. We'll have a little bit of joy, and every day we'll try a different locally owned restaurant to support them. And 6 months in, we had spent $6,000 while our revenue was way down. And I was like, so I didn't understand that we will always be in COVID times. So we're gonna have to back off on that, which was hilarious. And I don't really regret it because everybody was doing the best that they could. And I was like, you know what? I'm also going to pay everybody an extra $5 an hour hazard pay because it's scary. It was scary. We were frightened. And I know that now that people have had vaccines and boosters, and now that we're living in it a little bit, it's not as scary. We were sanitizing our mail. We were at this shop, like we had two wireless phones, as opposed to a wired phone, which my kids would not recognize. And we would put a piece of paper out with whoever's name. So I might say Erin, and the phone would go on that, and only I could answer that phone. And nobody else could touch the phone because we wouldn't get the COVID. And we'd wear gloves, and we would do all this stuff. So it was scary. So hazard pay seemed appropriate. But I was making far less money, hemorrhaging all this additional rate of pay. And fun fact, we didn't qualify for PPP loans. We qualified for $16,000, which is not nothing. I'll take $16,000 anytime anybody wants to hand that to me. There were businesses getting $250,000 that were essentially the same type of business as me. And there were wine shops that just decided to close up that were given $50,000 to just reopen sometime. And, I struggle so much with right and fair and equal are not always the same thing. But it was a real drag. So we were doing a lot of pivoting. We started delivering. We did curbside. We set up a different way that people could shop. Our hustle was real, and our customers were also really hilarious because in the beginning, when we all thought it was temporary, they would tip us on a case of wine, $20 or $100, like, we want you to be here in 2 months. And then people were like, girl, I can't hand out 20s and 50s and 100 every time I go to pick up wine or groceries, so everybody was trying to figure it out as best as they could. I am proud of even the missteps, like lunch every day that was probably poorly thought through, but I'm proud that it came from the attempt to get it right. We had an employee that had a young child, and of course, immediately didn't have school. And I was like, well, we can figure out. You can do some of your work after hours. You can come in with your child. And maybe you're in charge of cleaning. I know you don't want to clean, like nobody wants to clean, but you could come in on the weekends with your kids. So you're not paying, childcare or, whatever, like we could try and figure it out. And so we tried to get really creative. We didn't lay off anybody during COVID. As people left, we were like, whoo, so like we had people get other jobs or have to stay home with their kids, and we just sort of let that happen and wished people well, but didn't replace them. And that was interesting. One of our employees bought an RV. She and her wife just took off, and they live the RV life now, and because now her spouse can work remotely. And I'm like, right on. So we just tried really hard to support people. Nobody was okay during COVID. Nobody was okay. And, again, the hero of our own stories, I was not okay. My employees were not okay. And we all handled it really differently. And it was sad, and it was hard, and it was frightening. And 2019, I hit my personal income goals for the shop, and I just sort of like did the mic drop and did the little like touchdown dance, and I was like, I did it, I've arrived, I'm an overnight success, 20 years in the making, like I did it. And I, because I was raised Catholic, so I then was convinced that my internal gloating was why the pandemic arrived, because certainly I had that power. But I didn't handle the emotions of it well. Nobody did. I don't know anybody that really got it right all the way through. And we were trying, and we were doing our best, and some days were a lot better than others. And we kind of had gotten into our rhythm a little bit when the fires arrived in 2020. And my Instagram, like everybody's Instagram, the professional Instagram is funny, and it's cheerful, and it's positive, and it's great photos. But if you dig back and you go through 2020 and 2021, I was like, this is not okay to only post the good things, because it's not true. And there's a picture of me sitting on my deck outside during the fires, and the picture is appropriate, but I'd come home and changed from work. You love these stories, don't you, Rich? And I'd put on a t-shirt. That was what I was wearing. And that was it. And I went out on the deck because I couldn't decide what clothes to wear because it was just too big of a decision to make. And I made an Aperol spritz about the size of a fishbowl. And then I rolled a joint about the size of a cigar. I don't know if I can say this on the Wine Archives. Here we are. And I sat outside with my Aperol spritz, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And my house has a little bit of a view, and it didn't. It was just a wall of gray. I mean, I shouldn't have been outside in it. It wasn't even safe. But I just sat outside and I just sobbed. And I posted a picture that, was sort of a version of that. And I was like, I'm not okay, and I know you're probably not okay, and we're not okay together. But you get to suffer right now because the world is suffering. Everybody forgets that 2020 started off with the collective gasp of the world that Australia was on fire. We were looking at pictures of burned koala bears thinking, how will we ever get through this tragedy? And now if you ask people what things happened in 2020, I just taught a class, actually a PCC class a couple weeks ago, on the hardships of 2020 wine industry. And I started off saying, okay, what happened in 2020? People were like, COVID got here, and George Floyd and Black Lives Matter became a focus of conversation. And then if they're locals, they were like, and the fires in Oregon. And I was like, and actually there was a whole lot more. Let's keep going. So our collective pain was so real. And so, we tried at the shop to support each other, but to recognize that some days I was really not okay, and some days my colleagues were really not okay. And there was crying at work by grown-ups that needed to, you don't cry at work, pull yourself together, cry in the car like everybody else. But in 2020, there was just crying. There was a lot, And then the fire is getting so close to the wineries themselves, and that was just this crazy mess. My friend Angie with Adelstein, she and I texting, until 1 a.m. one night as winery after winery after winery were being evacuated. We were on level 3 evacuation, which means you should probably be sober enough to drive and know where your passports are, but you don't actually have to pack your stuff, but you should just kind of know. And that was terrifying, and it wasn't actually on my doorstep as it was on people's doorsteps. So so 2020, man, 2020, what a year.
On a more positive note, because we would never end the interview talking about that, thank goodness. You mentioned reopening. Things have started to reopen. We are still living with COVID, but we are starting to learn to live with it. So tell me about coming out of it for both for you and for the shop. How have you come out of it, and what are you kind of looking ahead to for the future?
Yeah, it's happening. It's opening up. We have events coming back online. We've had our first couple of in-person events. We're being more thoughtful. I told you before that I would, if somebody wanted to book me for an event, I would take their money. I'll take it, because I've always had this desperate need to grab money, because I've lived in poverty. And if ever you've lived in poverty, I think you can get a little weird about money. Mm-hmm. And I'm still super weird about money. My husband is the most lovely human being on the whole planet, and I keep getaway money, and he's like, girl, why you call it that? And I'm like, I don't know, it just makes me sleep better. And he's like, fine, you do you, babe, you do you. And so I just, as I'm opening up the shop, I can think more about, what do I actually need? What does a shop need? And when I'm almost 50, working 14-hour days is not as easy as it used to be. So I'm thinking about, like, how do we change that? And so we're making more choices there. I've got this really cool team. I added Andy McVeigh, who is, he left wine production because he wants to get into wine education to focus on sustainability. Sustainability has always been a huge pillar of the shop. I mean, I've been asking people if they want a paper bag for 20 years, and in the beginning they'd be like, yeah, how else would I carry it? And now they're like, no, this is only 9 bottles, I can do it, I've got pockets. Like, people are getting much more awesome at sustainability. So adding an educator, like, that's another focus. So we're gonna grow our education platform. And then, we added a new marketing person, Natalie Hebert, who's amazing, and so she's getting us more, and she's 30, so she knows, she's got a finger on the pulse of the youth in a way that I do not, and I really appreciate that. Since my kids moved away, I don't have good music anymore, so she's helping me there. So we're continuing to open up that way and think about what can be next. But what's awesome and a little scary is that we are not just saying yes to everything. So I'm saying no to some money, and that's really hard for me, but we want to be more intentional. Eventually I will have to retire. I can't sell this business to somebody and be like, great news, you only work 14 hours a day. Do you know how to make croissants for Nike? You gotta be thinking long term about what you can actually do with the business. And so I'm still not quite sure. We've had a few in-person events. In Cho, which is Oregon's first Korean-American winery. They did an in-person pop-up. We just had Chris James Cellars, who was rated the #1 Oregon winery from Wine Press Northwest, changed their name. That's all very confusing to me, but they were rated the #1 wine. We just had them in, and so we're looking at ways to bring in more thoughtful things and not necessarily be beholden to a schedule that doesn't make sense to us. And it's exciting. And I'm traveling a ton in a way that I haven't before. I'm going out to meet wineries. I'm going out to meet people, a lot of them with masks, that kind of thing. But I was like, I belong in this industry, and before I retire, I want to build a personal legacy. I want to earn these relationships. I want to earn these connections. And so I've been really doing that, and it's been really special. It's been really amazing. And I mean, what a privilege to be part of this industry. The good, the bad, and the ugly, because most of it is amazing. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Last question for you then is about the future of the Oregon wine industry. You talked about the changes you've seen.
Yeah.
What comes next? What does it look like down the road?
I think we do an even better job with sustainability in Oregon. We've always been thoughtful, but we haven't always gotten it right. And so, I think we're gonna get rid of foils. There's really something we're working on. You don't need foils. We don't need foils. So I think we'll see some changes there. I think we're gonna see a lot more. I think it's gonna start to look more old world. Mm-hmm. And I think we can really marry on the production side. I think we can really marry old world with modern invention. There is amazing new important inventions in winemaking that are improving the practices and are making things more sustainable, and by that I mean less chemicals in the vineyard, using different strategies for cleaning barrels that are less chemical, using more livestock. There's a lot of different things we can do. That when I say sustainable, I mean all of the whole looking at your business holistically and what can we do that's better. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to see more sustainable practices. I think we're going to see more thoughtful practices in the vineyard and in the wineries. I think we're going to see more diversity in tasting rooms. I think we're going to see, and if you hire people at an entry level position, if they have a passion for the wine industry, they will grow into your next CEOs, to your leaders. I mean, we've seen that with lots of incredible leaders here in Oregon that they started at, in vineyards, they started in tasting rooms. So I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more wineries and wine shops true to who they are. It used to be if you were different and somehow, if there was a thing that made you othered from other wineries, you kind of kept that quiet. And now I think you can lead with that. And I think that's really, really cool. That I think that now you can, I would have never said 20 years ago, it's a woman-owned wine shop. Like, don't tell them. I want them to come to the shop, and now, like, we get to lead with that. We get to lead with being, with that. So I think, and I'm seeing, Remy, my God, what Remy's doing for this industry, unbelievable. Wine Country Pride, like, okay, maybe you're somebody who doesn't care about LGBTQ issues in the world, and that's sad, but maybe you don't care about that, but guess what? Tons and tons and tons of people do. Let's not worry about the person who's going to be critical. Let's take care of the people that do care about it and need this representation. So I think we're just going to see more representation growing and growing and growing. And I think what I want to see, though, is I want to see people understanding that shopping locally is romantic and is important, because what I think I see a lot is that people feel like the same way that I was misguided when I started the shop. I think people think it makes them seem fancier to show up with a bottle of wine from Italy or from France, which, by the way, I love and I sell and I respect and I'm all about it. But I think if people could pause and be like, wait, I could actually bring a wine from Oregon that is unbelievable, that's what I should do. I should be proud of this, because if you lived in Champagne, you wouldn't take a bottle of champagne somewhere and be like, sorry, all I could get my paws on was this champagne. You'd be like, oh shit, you guys, we live in Champagne. We need to say that in Oregon, and we need to believe that because it's true. And we're even better off than so many parts of the world. Let me brag here, right? Because we're doing the sparkling game strong. We've got reds, we've got whites, we've got pinks, we've got pet nats, we've got people trying. We're not beholden to the rules of old world like a lot of regions are. So we can just do it. You've got Earl Jones down in Abasela was like, there are no rules, hold my beer. We're gonna just put Spain right down in Roseburg. Like, that's awesome. And so what I see for the Oregon wine industry is there's still room for visionaries. And I think people think that they've missed the opportunity. And I'm like, I know that you wish you were planting grapes with the founders. Like, that would have been rad. That would have been really rad. But there's still room for visionaries, and there's still room for growth, and there's still room for others and difference, and there's still room for creativity. And I think my shop probably landed like kind of a splat right in the middle of it. We didn't quite get it right. We weren't at the beginning, and we're not the most, like, there are people with newer, fresher ideas, but like, we've had this consistency, and I'm like, I can't wait to see what everybody else does, because I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of my people in the wine industry. They're awesome.
Awesome. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we
I don't know how that's possible. We've been here for a week and a half.
Been here since 2020. I swear it's been at least that long.
Honestly.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, for your stories, for your hospitality. Thank you so much, and we'll let you off the hook.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.